Welcome. Before we begin, take a breath, a slow one, in through the nose and out. Good. Tonight, you do not need to think. You do not need to solve anything. Whatever is waiting for you tomorrow, it can wait a little longer. Right now, the only thing that exists is this voice and a very small village in a very grey part of England a very long time ago. Nothing important happened there. No kings visited, no battles were fought nearby, no great discoveries were made. A fence was repaired once, and people talked about it for a week. That is, in many ways, the point. Let your body sink a little heavier into wherever you are lying. Feel the weight of it, the warmth of it. You have done enough today. Whatever enough looked like, you did it. My name is not important. What is important is that you are comfortable, that your body is relaxed, that the day you have just finished is behind you now and no longer your concern. You do not need to do anything right now. You only need to listen. We begin in the year 1247 in the county of Lincolnshire in the east of England on a Tuesday in early October. The sky was grey. It was frequently grey. This is something you should know about medieval Lincolnshire. The sky was grey, the fields were brown, the mud was everywhere, and the people went about their lives with the quiet determination of individuals who had never been told that things might be otherwise. Close your eyes now, if you haven't already. This is their story, or rather, this is their Tuesday.
It is before dawn. The village is dark, not the kind of dark you are perhaps used to, where there is always a small light somewhere, a phone, a street lamp, the glow of something electric. This is the dark of a place with no electricity, no gas, no candles left burning, and clouds thick enough to hide every star. It is very dark. And it is cold. October in medieval Lincolnshire was not a gentle month. The warmth of summer had finished its business and departed without ceremony. The mornings were sharp, the kind of cold that does not announce itself, but simply sits there, waiting, in every corner of every room. In a small cottage near the center of the village, a man named Edmund woke up. He did not wake up pleasantly. He woke up the way most people in the 13th century woke up, gradually, reluctantly, and because something nearby made a noise. In this case, it was the rooster. The rooster lived outside, near the back of the cottage. It had no name. It was a rooster. Its purpose was to crow in the morning, and it performed this purpose with great enthusiasm and very little sense of timing. It crowed before it was fully light. It crowed sometimes in the middle of the night when something disturbed it. It crowed occasionally for no reason that anyone could determine. Edmund lay on his bed and listened to the rooster. The bed was a wooden frame, low to the ground, filled with a mattress of stuffed straw. The straw had been replaced in the spring, which meant it was now approximately 6 months old. It was no longer particularly springy. It had compressed over the months into something closer to a firm, slightly uneven surface that smelled faintly of must and animal. Edmund did not find this remarkable. It was his bed. It was the only bed he had ever slept in. He had nothing to compare it to. He was warm, at least. He slept in his under-tunic, a long linen garment he also wore during the day. Beside him, his wife Matilda was still asleep, her breathing slow and even. Near the far wall, behind a rough curtain, their 2 children slept on a smaller pallet. The fire in the central hearth had burned down to coals overnight. The room was cold, but not as cold as outside. The coals still gave off a faint warmth. Edmund sat up. The floor of the cottage was packed earth, covered in a layer of dried rushes. In summer, the rushes were pleasant enough, dry, slightly fragrant if you used the right kind. In October, they had absorbed several months of foot traffic, food scraps, and general household life, and they were not particularly pleasant. They were simply there, as they had always been. He stood, and the cold air settled around him immediately. He moved to the hearth and knelt beside it. He stirred the coals with an iron poker until he found a small patch still glowing red, then added dry tinder, small shavings of wood kept in a box beside the fire for this exact purpose. He blew carefully until the tinder caught. This took about 4 minutes. He added a small piece of wood, then a larger one. The fire grew. The room did not immediately become warm, but it became slightly less cold, which was something. Outside, the rooster crowed again. Edmund looked at the door, then at the fire, then at nothing in particular. He was not fully awake yet. Most people in the 13th century spent the first hour of the day in a state somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, moving through their morning tasks with the slow efficiency of long habit. He had done this every morning for as long as he could remember. He would do it again tomorrow. He crossed the room to the lower end of the cottage, where, behind a low wooden partition, the animals spent the night. There was one ox, a large brown animal named nothing in particular, and 2 pigs, and several chickens who roosted on a low beam. The smell was what you would expect. Edmund had long since not noticed it. He checked the ox briefly, running a hand along its side. It was warm. It was breathing. These were the relevant facts about an ox at 5 in the morning. The pigs grunted when he came near. He ignored them. He went back to the living area. Matilda was awake now, sitting up and pulling her outer tunic over her under tunic. She said something. Edmund said something back. Neither of them said anything that would have been worth writing down, and so it was not written down. She went to the fire. He went to the door and opened it. The air outside was cold and very still. The village was beginning to wake. He could hear, distantly, the sound of another door opening, the movement of animals somewhere, the faint suggestion of voices. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, shifting from complete black to a dark, featureless gray. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went back inside. Breakfast was pottage. Pottage was a word that meant essentially a thick grain-based stew made of whatever was available. It was the primary food of medieval peasants across England, across most of Europe, across most of the world where grain was grown and people needed to eat it in the most efficient way possible. Matilda had made a large pot of pottage the previous evening. It had sat in the pot overnight, thickening. She hung it over the fire now to reheat. Today's pottage was made from barley, the most common grain in this part of Lincolnshire, boiled until it was soft and thick, with some dried peas for substance and a small amount of onion that had been growing in the garden at the back of the cottage. There was no meat. Meat was for feast days or for people wealthier than Edmund. Today was neither. She added salt. Salt was expensive. She added a small amount. Then she thought about it and added a very small amount more. It was a cold morning. The children woke up while the pottage was heating. They appeared from behind the curtain, looking as children have always looked in the early morning, rumpled, slightly confused, not entirely committed to being awake. The older one, a boy of about 9, named William, immediately began looking for his shoes. He found one shoe near the fire and the other shoe near the partition, where one of the chickens had apparently been sitting on it. He removed the chicken. He put on the shoe. The younger child, a girl of about 6, named Alice, sat near the fire and looked at it. They ate. The pottage was hot and thick and tasted of barley and onion and salt. It tasted the same as it had tasted the previous morning and the morning before that, and most mornings stretching back further than any of them could easily remember. This was not a complaint. It was warm. It was filling. It was enough. They ate without speaking much. There was nothing particularly urgent to say. The day was the same as the day before, as far as anyone could tell from the inside of a cottage at dawn. Edmund finished his pottage. He put on his outer tunic, a rough woolen garment, dark brown, slightly large, which he had worn for 3 years and would wear for several more. He put on his boots, which were made of thick leather and came up to his ankle. He picked up his hat. He went to work.
The village of Thornwick sat in the middle of 3 large open fields. We will call them the North Field, the South Field, and the East Field, because that is what everyone in the village called them, and there is no reason to be creative about something that has worked perfectly well for 200 years. Each field was enormous by the standards of what a single person might farm. Together, the 3 fields contained hundreds of strips of land, each strip about a furlong long, that is roughly 200 meters and about 4 meters wide. Each household in the village farmed a number of these strips scattered across all 3 fields, so that no single family had all the good land or all the bad land. This system was called the open field system, and it had been in use in this part of England for several generations. It was not a perfect system. No one who worked it would have described it as a perfect system, but it was the system, and so they worked it. Edmund farmed 11 strips scattered across the north and south fields. This was a reasonable number, not the most, not the least. He was a villein, a peasant who held land in exchange for labor obligations to the lord of the manor. He owed the lord several days of work per week on the lord's own land, called the domain, and various other dues and payments that he preferred not to think about first thing in the morning. Today, however, was his own day. He was working his own strips. The south field was partially fallow this year, resting as the rotation required, but the north field had been planted with winter wheat in September, and there was still work to do, clearing weeds from the edges, checking drainage, the endless small maintenance that a field required to remain a field and not simply become a patch of ground with ideas above its station. He walked through the village to the north field. The path was muddy. It was always muddy in October. He walked the way he always walked, steadily, without hurrying, with the particular gait of someone who had walked this same path hundreds of times and knew exactly where the worst patches of mud were. He passed the church. It was a small stone building, squat and old, with a tower that had developed a very slight lean sometime in the past century. No one had done anything about the lean. It was not getting significantly worse. This was considered acceptable. He passed the mill, which sat on the small stream at the edge of the village. The wheel was turning. It was always turning when there was water enough. The sound of it was a constant in village life, the slow, rhythmic creak and splash that had been there so long that most people heard it the way they heard their own breathing. He passed the house of Geoffrey Marsh. Geoffrey Marsh was standing outside his house, looking at a fence. Edmund looked at Geoffrey Marsh looking at the fence. Geoffrey Marsh looked at Edmund. Neither of them said anything about the fence. They had a disagreement about a strip in the north field, specifically about exactly where the boundary between Edmund's fourth strip and Geoffrey's second strip was located. This was not a new disagreement. It had begun 3 years ago when Geoffrey argued that a particular large stone marked the boundary differently than Edmund believed. Edmund held that the stone had moved. Geoffrey held that it had not. Neither could prove anything. The strip in question was approximately 2 meters wide and produced in a good year, perhaps enough barley to make a difference to no one in particular. The disagreement continued. "Morning," said Edmund. "Morning," said Geoffrey. Edmund walked on. The north field was already occupied. Several other villagers had arrived before him. He could see them moving along their strips in the grey morning light, bent figures against the pale sky. Somewhere to his left, a man was driving an ox through a strip he had already harvested, churning the soil. To his right, 2 women were working side by side, pulling something from the earth. Edmund reached his strips. He stood for a moment and looked at them. The winter wheat had been planted about 3 weeks ago and was just beginning to show, a faint green haze along the brown earth, barely visible unless you knew it was there. He checked the edges of the strip where weeds tended to encroach from the headland, the unplanted turning space at the end of each strip. He pulled several up by hand and tossed them aside. He moved along the strip slowly, systematically. There was a drainage channel along one edge that had partially filled with soil and needed to be cleared. He used a small spade, a wooden-handled iron tool, much repaired, the handle worn smooth from years of use, to dig out the blocked section. The work was not complicated. It was repetitive and physical, and required a certain kind of attention that was not quite thought and not quite absence of thought, but somewhere in between. The body knows what to do, the hands know, the mind drifts. Edmund thought about the fence, not Geoffrey's fence specifically, just fences generally, a section of his own garden fence that had developed a softness in one of the posts, the kind of softness that meant rot and would need attention before winter properly arrived. He thought about this for some time. Then he thought about something else. Then he stopped thinking and just worked. Around him, the village worked too. The sounds of it were few and familiar. The distant creak of the mill, the occasional low sound of an ox, the thin wind moving across the flat field. Someone far away was hammering something. The sounds came and went. The morning continued. The sky lightened slowly, evenly, without drama. There was no sunrise visible, just a gradual brightening of the uniform gray overhead, as if the sky was being turned up slowly, like adjusting the flame of an oil lamp. By mid-morning, Edmund had cleared the drainage channel and pulled weeds from 3 of his strips. He stood and stretched, pressing one hand against the small of his back. His back ached in the mornings. It had ached in the mornings for several years now. He was 31 years old. He looked across the field. A man named Robert Fletcher was sitting on the ground a few strips away, apparently doing nothing. He had been sitting there for some time. He was looking at the middle distance with an expression that suggested he was either thinking deeply about something or thinking about nothing at all. He watched him for a moment, then he went back to work. The argument about the boundary strip happened at approximately mid-morning. It was not a dramatic argument. Most medieval villages were not dramatic. They were repetitive and procedural, revisiting the same points in the same order, like a path that has been walked so many times it has worn itself into the ground. Geoffrey Marsh appeared at the edge of Edmund's fourth strip and looked at the ground near the boundary. Edmund looked at Geoffrey Marsh looking at the ground. "That stone," said Geoffrey. "I know," said Edmund. "It's moved again." "It hasn't." "It has. Stones don't move, Geoffrey. This one does."
Edmund looked at the stone. It was a large, flat, grey stone, approximately the size of a man's torso, sitting in the ground at an angle. It looked to Edmund exactly as it had always looked. It looked to Geoffrey apparently different. This was the fundamental nature of their disagreement, and it showed no signs of resolving itself. "The boundary," said Edmund, "is the same as it has always been. The boundary," said Geoffrey, "is 2 feet further to your side than you think. It isn't. It is." They both looked at the stone. The stone said nothing. Stones, as a rule, do not involve themselves in boundary disputes. This is one of their more admirable qualities. After a moment, Geoffrey made a sound that expressed dissatisfaction without committing to any specific statement, and walked back to his own strip. Edmund watched him go. Then he went back to work. This argument would continue in various forms for 8 more years. Neither of them would win. The stone would not move. Edmund knew this. Geoffrey knew this. They would have the argument anyway, because that is what the argument was for, not to resolve anything, but to maintain a kind of order, to mark the boundary of their disagreement as clearly as the stone was supposed to mark the boundary of their land. The morning wore on. The sky remained grey. The wind moved across the field from the northeast, steady and cold, carrying the smell of damp earth and the distant suggestion of rain that had not yet decided to arrive. Edmund worked his way along his strips, one by one. The work was slow and the work was thorough, and when it was done, it would need to be done again in a few weeks, and then again after that, and this was simply the nature of the work. Fields didn't stay maintained by themselves. They required constant, unhurried attention, the way almost anything worth keeping required constant, unhurried attention. He was halfway down his 7th strip when he stopped and looked at the sky. The clouds were the color of old pewter. They moved slowly from east to west, one layer slightly faster than another, the way clouds sometimes move when the air at different heights is going different directions at once. He watched them for a moment. They looked like rain. They had looked like rain.
At midday, a bell rang from the church tower. It was a small bell, and it did not ring loudly, but the village was small, and the fields were flat, and sound carried across flat fields with considerable efficiency. Everyone heard it. Work paused. Edmund straightened up, set down his spade and rolled his shoulders. He put on his outer tunic, which he had taken off during the morning's work, and folded over a nearby fence post. He picked up the cloth bag that he had brought from home and walked back toward the village. This was dinner. In the 13th century, the midday meal was called dinner, and it was the main meal of the day. The word dinner at this time simply meant the first large meal of the day, and it happened at midday, and everyone who could manage it stopped working to eat it. Edmund ate his midday meal sitting on a low wooden bench outside the cottage door, in the company of his wife Matilda and the 2 children who had come back from their own morning tasks, William from helping at a neighbour's barn, Alice from gathering firewood at the common woodland at the far edge of the village. The food was the remaining pottage from the morning, reheated and carried outside in a clay pot. Alongside it, Matilda had cut thick slices from a round loaf of dark bread baked 2 days earlier. The bread deserves some description, because it was not like bread you might be familiar with. It was dark, much darker than most bread today. It was made from a coarse flour that had been ground at the mill, a flour that contained a significant amount of bran and husk and all the other parts of the grain that modern milling would remove. This made the bread very dense, very heavy. It did not rise much. It was not soft. It tasted of grain and effort and the particular smoky character that came from being baked in a clay oven heated with wood. It was filling in the way that only a food of almost pure substance can be filling. You did not eat a great deal of it because you did not need to. A thick slice of this bread combined with the pottage was enough. There was no butter today. Butter was made from the milk of a few village cows, and it was October, and the cows' milk production had declined. There was a small piece of hard cheese that Matilda had set aside. She divided it into 4 pieces, a slightly larger one for Edmund, smaller ones for herself and the children. There was ale. There was always ale, and this requires explanation because it may seem strange to drink ale in the middle of a working day. The reason was practical. The water in most medieval villages was not reliably safe to drink. It came from wells or streams that also received the runoff of the village, from the animals, from the waste, from everything that the rain washed from the streets. Ale, because it was brewed by boiling water and then fermenting it, was considerably safer. The ale made in Edmund's household was weak, much weaker than modern ale. It was called small ale, and it contained enough alcohol to make it safe and almost none beyond that. Children drank it. Everyone drank it. It was the water of the medieval world. They drank it now from clay cups. The meal was quiet. Not uncomfortably quiet, just quiet in the way that a meal is quiet when everyone is hungry and the food is good enough and there is nothing urgent to discuss. Edmund ate his pottage, Matilda ate her pottage, William ate his pottage very quickly, the way 9-year-old boys eat when they have been working all morning and are very hungry. Alice ate slowly, looking at things. After the meal, the pot was scraped and set aside. The bread crusts that remained were kept. Nothing was wasted. Edmund sat for a while on the bench and did not do anything in particular. This was allowed. The midday rest was part of the day's rhythm, the pause between the morning's work and the afternoon's. He sat with his back against the warm wood of the cottage wall. The south-facing wall caught what sun there was, even on grey days, and the wood held a faint warmth, and he looked at the village without seeing any of it particularly. A dog walked past. It belonged to someone in the village, or possibly to no one. It was a medium-sized dog of indeterminate color, and it moved with the purposeful air of a dog that has somewhere to be and is not entirely certain where that is. It disappeared around the corner of a nearby cottage. Somewhere in the village, a child was shouting about something. The shouting stopped. The mill went on turning. After approximately 15 minutes, Edmund stood up, put on his outer tunic again, picked up his spade, and went back to the fields.
The afternoon began. It was a long afternoon, as afternoons in medieval England tended to be. There was no particular reason for it to feel long. The number of hours in the afternoon was the same as it had always been. But October afternoons in Lincolnshire have a particular quality of length to them, perhaps because the light is already beginning to fail by the middle of the afternoon, and yet the day continues anyway. The work continues anyway, as if the world and the worker have made an agreement to carry on regardless. Edmund went back to his strips. The morning's work had covered 7 of his 11 strips. He began on the 8th. The 8th strip was in the lower part of the north field, where the ground was slightly wetter than average. This was not a crisis, it was simply a fact about the 8th strip. The soil held water longer than the soil higher up. In a dry summer, this could be an advantage. In a wet October, it was something to manage. He checked the drainage again. He pulled the weeds from the edges. He walked the length of the strip slowly,
checking the young wheat shoots, checking the condition of the soil, doing the many small assessments that a farmer does without naming them as assessments, just looking, feeling, knowing. Then he moved to the 9th strip. Around him the afternoon went on. A woman named Agnes Carter was working a strip about 30 meters away. She was a widow. Her husband had died 2 winters ago of a fever, and she farmed her land herself, with help from her eldest son, who was 14 and large for his age. Today she was alone, working steadily and without apparent hurry, moving along her strip with the efficiency of someone who has learned to pace themselves over a long day. She and Edmund exchanged a nod when he reached a point near her strip. Nothing more was needed. At some point in the early afternoon, perhaps the first hour, perhaps the second, a cart appeared on the road that ran along the edge of the north field. It was a heavy wooden cart pulled by 2 horses, moving at the slow, steady pace of horses pulling a heavy load. In the cart were barrels, large wooden barrels, sealed, stacked in 2 layers. Edmund watched it pass. Several other villagers also paused their work to watch the cart pass. This was not because the cart was particularly interesting. It was because something was moving through the village, and when you have been looking at the same field for several hours, something moving through the village is worth pausing for. The cart continued. It was going, someone said later, toward the town of Lincoln, which was perhaps 15 miles to the north. Salted fish, someone else said. The barrels smelled of salt. The cart disappeared around a bend in the road. Everyone went back to work. Edmund worked through the 9th strip and into the 10th. His back ached steadily, the same ache it always gave him in the afternoons, the particular complaint of a body that has been bent over for many hours. He ignored it with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been ignoring it for years. The clouds moved overhead. The light changed slightly, not the light of sun appearing, but the more subtle light of clouds thinning and then thickening again, as if the sky was making small adjustments that it ultimately decided against. It did not rain. The wind continued from the northeast. At the far end of the field, a boy of about 12 was driving a pair of oxen along the headland, the unplanted turning strip at the end of the rows. He was guiding them with a stick and a series of sounds that oxen apparently understood, and no one else needed to. The oxen moved patiently. They were large and brown and completely uninterested in anything except the next step. Edmund watched them for a moment. He moved to his 11th strip. This was the last strip. He had done the others well, carefully, methodically, without rushing. He did the 11th the same way. There was a section near the lower end that had some thistle coming through from the headland, which he pulled up, getting the roots where he could. There was a slight hollow in the middle of the strip that tended to collect water, which he noted and would address properly before the worst of the winter came. He reached the far end of the strip. He stood. He looked back along the length of the strip, across the other 8 strips he had worked today, across the whole of his portion of the north field. The young wheat was invisible at this distance, but he knew it was there. He would know if something was wrong with it the way you always know such things, by a change in how the ground looks, a difference in color or texture that is almost below the threshold of conscious notice. Nothing looked wrong. He picked up his spade and his bag and turned toward the village. The light was beginning to fail. The afternoon ended, the afternoon's end in October, not with a clear transition, but with a slow dimming, the sky going from pale grey to a darker, denser grey, the outlines of things becoming softer, less certain. Edmund walked back through the village. Other people were also walking back, from the fields, from the common, from wherever the afternoon had taken them. They moved along the same paths in the same directions, the daily migration inward as the light failed, as automatic and unremarkable as the tide. The village smelled of wood smoke.
Every cottage had its fire going now, or building toward going, and the smoke rose from every roof hole and drifted low in the still evening air. It was a smell that was entirely particular to this time and this place, not unpleasant, rich and heavy and full of the specific character of the wood being burned, which was mostly oak and elm from the managed woodland at the village's edge. Edmund passed Geoffrey Marsh's house. Geoffrey was not outside. The day's argument was over, in the sense that all arguments are over at the end of the day, even if they will begin again the next morning. He passed the church. The priest, a man named Thomas, who was neither young nor particularly old, was standing in the churchyard, looking at something on the ground near the east wall. He was a small man with a narrow face and hands that were always slightly dirty despite his position, because he also farmed a small plot of land near the church as supplemental income. He glanced up as Edmund passed. "Evening," said Father Thomas. "Evening, Father," said Edmund. Edmund went home. The cottage was warm when he opened the door, or warmer than outside, which felt like the same thing after the long, cold afternoon. The fire was burning well. The smell was of smoke and pottage and the animals in the lower end of the cottage, a combination that was simply the smell of home. Matilda was stirring the pot. She had added something to the morning's leftover pottage, a handful of dried beans soaked through the day, and a little more salt. The pot smelled of this. The children were inside. William was doing something near the fire involving a piece of rope and what appeared to be a wooden peg, something he was constructing for reasons that were not clear. Alice was asleep against the wall in the corner, curled on a folded blanket, her knees pulled to her chest. Edmund removed his boots. He set his spade by the door. He sat on the bench near the fire and felt the warmth come back into his hands. Outside, he could hear the sounds of the village settling into evening, voices here and there, the movement of animals being brought inside for the night, the distant bark of the dog from the afternoon, which apparently had not found wherever it was going and was trying again. The animals were brought in. This was Edmund's job in the evening, to bring the ox and the pigs from wherever they had spent the day into the lower end of the cottage. The ox had been in the small pen behind the cottage. The pigs had been loose in the garden, rooting through the harvested vegetable beds, doing what pigs do, which is useful. He guided them through the low door at the far end of the cottage, one by one. The ox came placidly. The pigs came with slightly more ceremony, but they came. The chickens were already on their beam, as they usually were by this time. Chickens know when the day is over. In this they are considerably more decisive than people. He came back inside and sat down again. Matilda served the pottage. It was the same pottage. It was always, in some sense, the same pottage. The pot was never fully emptied before new ingredients were added, so there was a continuity to it, a lineage of pottage stretching back further than anyone could trace. Today's pottage contained some of yesterday's pottage, which contained some of the day before's, and so on. It was warm and thick and tasted of beans and barley and the salt that Matilda used sparingly and well. There was bread, there was ale. They ate. The fire was the primary light now. There was a small oil lamp, a clay dish of rendered fat with a wick on the shelf near the wall, but it was lit only when needed. Firelight was free. The fire threw unsteady shadows across the room, making the familiar shapes of things, the table, the bench, the pot on its hook, the the sleeping child in the corner, into something slightly uncertain, slightly different from how they looked in daylight. After the meal, Matilda mended something, a section of woolen cloth, something from a tunic that had torn at the seam. She sat close to the fire where the light was best and worked with a bone needle and dark thread, her hands moving in small, precise movements. William had fallen asleep near the fire, the rope and peg construction abandoned beside him. Edmund sat. He was not thinking about anything in particular. The day was over. The strips had been checked. The drainage had been cleared. The arguments had been had. The meals had been eaten. The animals were in. The fire was burning. These were the relevant facts of the day, and they were all satisfactory. Outside, the wind had dropped. The night was very still. Somewhere in the village, someone was playing a stringed instrument, something small, a rebec or perhaps a sitole, someone who had an instrument and the desire to play it in the evening, the sound coming faint and thin through the cottage walls. It was a simple melody, unhurried, the same phrase repeating with small variations, the way a tune sounds when someone is playing for themselves rather than for anyone else. It played for a while, then it stopped. The fire settled with a small sound, a log shifting, a spray of sparks going briefly up. Matilda set down her mending and looked at the fire. Edmund looked at the fire. The oil lamp was not lit. There was enough firelight. It was enough. At some point, neither of them could have said exactly when, Father Thomas rang the church bell for Compline. It was the last bell of the day, the bell for the final prayer of the evening, a prayer that said essentially that the day was over and the night was beginning, and God was still there, and everything was all right. The bell rang 7 times. Then it was quiet again. Matilda went to bed. She lay on the straw mattress and pulled the woolen blanket up and closed her eyes. Edmund added one more piece of wood to the fire, a piece that would burn slowly and keep the coals going through the night, and then he lay down beside her. He lay on his back and looked at the underside of the roof, which was not visible in the dark, but which he knew was there.
The fire burned lower. It did not go out. Edmund had chosen the piece of wood well, a dense piece of elm that would take a long time to become coals, and the coals would hold until morning. But the fire burned lower, and the room grew darker, and the shapes of things dissolved into the general dark of the night. The cottage was not silent, it was quiet. There is a difference between silence and quiet. Silence is the absence of sound. Quiet is the presence of sounds so familiar and so soft that they do not disturb anything. The cottage was full of quiet sounds, the breathing of the sleeping children, the slow movement of the ox in the lower end, the occasional small sound of the pigs adjusting their position, the very faint creak of the roof timbers in the still air. Edmund lay and listened to these sounds. His back ached less when he was lying down. His hands, which had been cold most of the afternoon, were warm now under the blanket. He thought about the 9th strip and whether the hollow in the middle needed more attention than he had given it today. He thought about it for a while, then he stopped thinking about it. He thought about the fence post in the garden, the one with the soft spot from rot. He would look at it tomorrow, or the day after, before the hard frosts came. He thought about nothing for a while. Outside, very faintly, an owl called. It was a tawny owl, the kind that lived in the woodland at the edge of the village. Its call was a long, wavering sound that rose and then fell, answered a moment later by a second owl somewhere further away. This exchange continued for a few minutes, one owl, then another owl, then silence, then one owl again, and then it stopped. The night went on. Medieval people did not, as a rule, sleep through the night in a single unbroken stretch. This is one of those things that seems strange from where we are, but made perfect sense from where they were. The first sleep was the longer one, from shortly after dark until roughly midnight, sometimes a little later. Then, often, a waking period, an hour, sometimes more. People would lie in the dark, or sit up, or speak quietly to their spouse. Sometimes they would pray. Sometimes they would simply be awake in the dark, in a way that was not distressing, but simply part of the night's rhythm. Then the second sleep, from roughly the middle of the night until dawn. Edmund followed this pattern, as he always did, as most of the village did, because the body left to its own rhythms in a world without electric light tends toward this pattern. Around midnight, though he could not have said it was midnight, having no clock, knowing only the feeling of the night's middle, he woke. He lay on his back. Matilda was still asleep beside him. The children were quiet. The ox breathed slowly. He was not anxious. There was nothing pressing in the middle of the night, no thought that would not wait until morning, no urgency that the dark required. He simply lay in the quiet and was awake for a while. He thought about the field. He thought about the strips. He thought about the way the young wheat had looked this morning in the grey light, that faint green suggestion, barely there. He thought about the winter that was coming. He thought about it in the way you think about a thing that is large and certain, and not something you can do much about except prepare for it carefully, and then accept whatever it brings. The wood was mostly gathered, the grain was stored, the animals were in reasonable health, the fence needed attention. He thought about the fence. Then he stopped thinking about anything and lay in the dark for a while longer. Then he fell back to sleep. The night went on without him. The fire settled into low, steady coals, the ox breathed, the children breathed. The wind, which had dropped to nothing, stayed at nothing, and the night was as still as nights in medieval Lincolnshire could be, which was very still. A stillness that went all the way out to the flat horizon in every direction, across the dark fields, across the common, across the managed woodland, across all the other quiet villages scattered across the county, with each their own fires burning to coals, and their own sleeping families, and their own fields waiting for morning. The barley in the north field was growing, slowly, in the dark. The mill wheel had stopped. When the water level dropped at night, the miller stopped the wheel. It would start again in the morning. Geoffrey Marsh's house was dark. Geoffrey Marsh was asleep. The boundary stone was in the ground in the north field, in the dark, being a stone, which is what it was. Agnes Carter was asleep. Robert Fletcher was asleep, or perhaps staring at the roof in his own particular way. Father Thomas had said his prayers and was asleep in the small house beside the church. The dog was asleep somewhere. The village of Thornwick was asleep. The year was 1247. The night was Tuesday becoming Wednesday. The clouds overhead were the same clouds that had been there all day, thick and grey and holding their rain with great patience. Nothing happened. This was not a problem.
Most nights nothing happened, and this was exactly as it should be. The purpose of night was for nothing to happen, for the village to rest, and the fire to hold, and the animals to breathe, and the people to sleep. And so they did. And so can you. The field is tended, the animals are in, the fire will last until morning. There is nothing that needs your attention right now. There is nothing that the next few hours require from you. The day is finished. The work is done. Everything that needed to be done today has been done, and everything that will need to be done tomorrow will wait without complaint. You can rest now. The ox is sleeping. The children are sleeping. The whole quiet, grey, ordinary, unremarkable village of Thornwick is sleeping. There is a faint wind very far away, moving over the flat fields. There are 2 owls somewhere in the dark, probably asleep by now. There is a fire settling very slowly into warm coals. There is the smell of wood smoke. There is the dark. Nothing is wrong. Nothing needs to happen. The night has everything it needs. You may sleep now. You may sleep.
Thank you for spending this evening in Thornwick. If you are still awake, that is all right. The village will be here again tomorrow. The pottage will be the same. Geoffrey will look at the boundary stone. The ox will be brought in. Nothing will have changed. Nothing needs to change. Sleep well.